the first toolpath that I want to show you is going to be on the collar model that we created. So we're going to face that. So to create our facing toolpath, I'm going to click Face in the 2D milling panel. And then you can see that the face palette appears. And as I mentioned in the PowerPoint, you can see all of the different tabs across the top here that you're going to be defining to define the toolpath. So we're going to start with the tool. And with that, right now you can see in the tool library for this model, there are no tools existing. You can go through and actually search for tools here. What I have done already actually is created a tool library for this model. So I'm actually going to load that in. And this is something that you can also do for your models. And it makes it a little bit easier because they'll match up with the actual tools that are going to be used on your machine. So I have this library of tools already created. I'm going to select this very first tool, so the 3/4 inch face mill, and assign that. I'm going to go to the Geometry tab. And here you can see it actually pre-selects the outer boundary of the stock. So we don't have to make any changes there. It's a face toolpath. That is exactly what we need to cut. Now on the Heights tab, I can turn into 2D orientation, and you can see all of the different default levels that have been provided for you. The two that I tend to look at the most are the top height, so this would be where the cutting would start. So you can see it's set properly, it's set to the top of the stock, and then the bottom height as where it's going to stop cutting, and that's going to be at the model top. So again, those are great values for that. In terms of the Passes tab, this enables us to define the actual cutting path for the model. So I'm going to just rotate this a little bit here so we can see it in 3D. For this, I'm actually going to change the stock offset value. And this is going to ensure that, that the tool actually clears the stock before turning and making its next cutting path. So this is a good one to define here. In terms of some of the other options, I could enable any of these options to actually provide some additional control over. For me right here, I actually only need to cut that top stock off in one pass, so I don't need multiple depths. It's also going to be a finishing path here. I'm not going to be leaving any additional stock on the top. In terms of the final tab, the linking tab, you can see here that it has a number of different options as well. If you remember, I showed you how you can hover over any of these commands, and it provides a little tooltip to give you some help on what they each mean. For this, I'm going to leave all the defaults, and I tend to use defaults as a good starting point before I make a lot of changes, and then I would review it and then make changes if I had to. So ultimately, I've created my first facing path, and you can see here, so the blue line is showing where the actual tool is going to be cutting the material. The next toolpath that I'm going to add here is going to be an adaptive toolpath that's going to remove some of the material from the interior pocket. You can see here that it defaults to the same tool that was used in the first toolpath, so it's not going to work for this toolpath. So I'm going to select the 1/4 inch instead. I'm going to select that, and you can see that it assigns the new tool. On the Geometry tab, for this one, for this type of toolpath, I do have to select my my pocket selection. So for this first selection, I'm going to select this top edge so that it will cut down to that point. I don't need to make any more changes in terms of these options. I'm going to go to the Heights tab, and I am going to verify my top height and my bottom height. So you can see here that it was going to start cutting at the top of the stock, and that's not necessary here because I've actually already removed my stock in that very first facing toolpath. So I'm going to leave it like that. The bottom height is it's going to cut down to that selected contour, so that works out perfectly for me here. On the Passes tab, I do need to make a few changes here. And the first thing I'm going to do here is this is actually a roughing pass. So I am going to leave stock radially. So that's going to be on the walls of the pocket. However, on the bottom, I actually am not going to leave any stock. I'm going to go down to the bottom there. So I'll leave that as 0. Because this is an internal pocket, I'm also going to change some of the options over here. I want to make sure that my ramp type is set to helix, so that looks good, so I don't have to make any changes there. I'm going to select OK here. So again, I've left my default options as is for much of this, and you can see here how my toolpath was created, and you can see that it's helix spiraling down and making my cutting passes to remove all of the material down to that selected contour. So to create a second adaptive path to continue that, there's actually a really great tool here. I can go in and I can derive a new path from an existing path. So it's going to be a 2D milling. It's also going to be a 2D adaptive. So it's going to create a duplicate of that. This is a nice way to go through this because it will maintain the default settings or all of the settings that were used in the previous toolpath. So that's fine. We're going to keep that tool. The one change I am going to make, though, is the geometry. I don't want that surface now. I want to change my contour of the pocket down to this bottom edge. And you can see I can just go in and remove it and reselect an option. The remaining options, again, here are all going to default to what was used in the previous toolpath, so I don't need to make any changes. You can see my heights still look good. The Passes tab also, and my linking tab is still helix down into the part. So I'm going to click OK, and you can see now that the model begins to helix into the part and cuts the material all the way down. To finish machining the interior pocket here, I'm going to actually create a finishing 2D pocket. So I'm going to use the 2D pocket option. And with that, again, I'm going to change up my tool. So I'm going to select the tool option here, and I'm going to change it to a bit smaller tool. And you can see here how it appears. On the Geometry tab, I'm going to actually try and do both of them at the same time here, and selected both contours together. I'm going to go into my Heights tab, and you can see that the top height, again, still is with the top of the stock. I'm going to change that again to the model top. In the Passes tab, I'm also going to make a change here in the Finishing Passes option. So I'm going to go and enable this Finishing Passes, and I'm going to change the step over value here to 0.025 inches. Since this is a finishing pass, I want to make sure that there is no stock going to be left, so I'm going to disable that option here. And then on the linking tab, I'm going to make sure my ramp is okay. I'm going to set the ramp type here instead to plunge. And with that, I'm going to click OK and see how the toolpath gets generated. If I spin this a little bit, you can see the path and how it cuts that, as well how it cuts down to the bottom of my model. One thing you'll learn as you start getting more familiar and comfortable with this tool is that it is very flexible. So when I looked at this tool path, you can see that the ramp starts at the top of the model, and that's not necessary because we've already actually removed material in the previous adaptive. So it's very easy at any point to go in and actually make a change. So I'm going to change my top height to a selection height. So I'm going to click OK here, and you can see that that actually improves now. I'm not ramping in quite as long. So there's lots of different things that you'll learn, and you'll begin to learn and tweak as you work through these toolpath creations. So to finish things up here with this model, I'm going to actually create a couple drilling sequences to drill those holes. You can see that 2 of them are counterbore holes and 2 of them are tapped holes. I'm going to focus right now starting on just basically doing a spot drill for all 4 holes. With that, I'm going to choose my tool type, which is going to be my 1/4 inch spot drill tool, number 4. And I'm going to select that tool. In here with geometry for hole creation, you just have to actually select on the hole. So you can see here I can select my hole. I can actually also choose select same diameter, so you can see that those two that have the same diameter are selected. And then I can also go in and add additional holes here, and you can see that all 4 holes now will be spot drilled in the exact same path. On the heights tab, you can see how it's actually going to start at the top of the hole. For the whole bottom, what I actually want to do here is I actually also want to select the whole top, but I'm going to add a little bit of an offset here. So that's just going to allow me to quickly wrap it into the model and just do a little spot drill with the tip of the tool. On the linking tab, I am going to select the drilling wrap it out. There are a number of different options here, but I'm going to go with the drilling wrap it out, and I'm going to click OK. To create the counter bore holes, I'm actually going to create a bore tool path. So I'm selecting that on the pull down list in the milling panel. I'm going to choose the 1/8, which actually was already pre-selected, so that's fine. For my geometry, the circular face, I can select that and choose the same diameter so that it grabs the other one as well. We'll verify our heights, and the top and whole bottom actually looks good. The passes tab, this is going to be a finishing path, so I want to be sure that the no stock is being left. In terms of the finishing passes, I want to set my step over to 0.01, just make that a little bit smaller. And for the cycle type, I am going to leave the default at preserved rapid movement. For that now, I'm going to click OK, and it creates the tool path. I can select on that, and it will show what it's done there. To finish this up, I'm going to actually create another drill tool path. This time my tool again has to be a bit different. I'm going to actually use a 3mm drill here. It's what I have available. And I'm going to select my 2 cylinders. And on the heights tab, the difference here is I do want it to start cutting at the top of the hole, which is great, and it's going to go to the whole bottom. However, I'm actually going to ask it here there to drill the tip through the bottom of the model. So this is ensuring that it's going to extend through the bottom of the part. And I'm going to set a bit of a distance there, a breakthrough distance of 0.02. The cycle type for this is going to be chip breaking. So I'm going to choose the chip breaking and partial retract. And I'm going to select OK to complete that tool path. And you can see here how it's now drilled those as well. So if I highlight the first drilling, the bore, and you can see how it's going to actually create those all of those holes. So to create the other 2, you would do very much the same thing. You would select your surfaces. For the other 2, you can see that they're tapped. There's also a tapping cycle type that you can select. So to finish up, I actually want to just open up my final model here. So I have the collar final. And you can see how I've added all of the tool paths here. We did the spot drill for all 4 of them. We have our counter bore hole, our chip breaking. We have our drill that's going to drill the full holes there, and then the tap that gets added on top of that. For the next model, what I want to do is I actually want to go back to the wheel hub. However, I'm going to actually open a final model. This is going to have all the tool paths created in it. I don't have time to go through and create all of these, and it's definitely not the objectives of this course. I'm really focused on showing you the workflow, working through that toolpath dialog box. However, there are certain things in some of these that I do want to point out as really advantageous type functionality or tricks that you can use. The first one here that I want to discuss is in this adaptive roughing folder that we have right here. I've created a 3D adaptive, so it's created very much like the 2D one that we created in the collar model. However, defining how you define your geometry is a little bit different. Again, use your tooltips, hover over to get guidance when you go to create that. In terms of this inside adaptive path, what's nice about this, and there's a little bit of strategy here. What I've done here, if you go back over into my model here, you can see that I've actually created this interior surface. It's a bit tricky to see here. Let me turn on the visibility. You might see it a little better. And basically, it was a copy of that internal surface, and it's filling in all of the holes. So it's really just creating an interior cavity there. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that to define our area that we're going to machine. A reason I'm doing that for this adaptive is that I actually don't want to go down and remove all of the pocket material at the same time. So by selecting that surface, it allows me to define my geometry a little bit better. And then as I go into these additional toolpaths, you can see I've used a radial and a spiral. And these are basically strategies that are going to enable me to machine, again, that interior cavity and get a nice finish on it. And you can see here one's radial, one's spiral. And it's a little bit tight here, so that's why it's really solid blue. It's just the step over is very small to give it that smoother finish. And the radial and the spiral in two different directions to really finish that nicely. In terms of the next step then, I'm actually going in and pocketing out. So again, this is just a roughing toolpath that's going to remove all that material on the interior holes. And then finally finish it up with a finishing toolpath, which is this 2D contour, and it's removing all the material with a nice surface finish there. To continue this, there's also some exterior finishing that gets done. I've put that into a folder so that they're showing all of them together. You can see here as I select on them, there is a horizontal finish for all the horizontal surfaces. So this flat surface here, and then there's a horizontal surface up here as well that it's removing material from. There's a contour around the outside. So if you remember, we had defined our stock from solid, and there was a bit of an overlap there. So it's going to actually remove a nice contoured edge along the outside. You have a fillet along that edge. So if I look here, there's a fillet along this edge. So I've used the 3D contour toolpath here to machine that. Keep in mind, it's a workflow. You're still using that toolpath palette. You're still going through and defining your tools, your geometry, making sure your heights are okay, the passes, as well as the linking. And that's all of the same. And really the big difference here is how you define your geometry and then some of the parameter options. I do 2D contour across the corner, and that's going to get us that the chamfered edge there, and then also trace. And you can go and trace the round around the bottom there. You know, selecting the right tool size is going to get you that finished filleted edge. And we've already reviewed drilling, so you can see that these holes on the outsides are all done with a spot drill, a chip breaking drill, and then I've done a bore as well to remove that material for the counter bore. The next model, again, I'm going to open a final version of that sample model. And you can see here that I have all of my operations that I created. So each one of these are separate. And I am adding the toolpaths into each one. One of the big things that you want to make sure you're doing when you add your toolpaths into a multi-setup model would be that you want to make sure that your default folder is active. So in this situation, I want to add into the front operation. I want to be sure that I have this enabled so that any new toolpaths I create are going to be added in there. So that's just something that you want to be sure and do. And that's also true of if you want to add into a folder. At any time, you can actually drag and drop these and move them around. So, you know, if you do make a mistake, you can drag and put it in the right spot. So I'm going to actually show this one a little because it's a little bit different as well. The big difference here is Something that you didn't see when we set up the operations is a sketch that has been added to the model. So that's that black line that goes around. It's a rectangular sketch that's been added to the model. And the reason that's been added is it's basically going to help us define the geometry for our adaptive path. So the adaptive path here is, again, it's a 3D adaptive, and you can see here that it's removing all of the material kind of through that channel. What's key here is that I do not want it to focus on the area in here inside of the, I'm going to do that as a 2D path. When I actually look at this bottom side, I'm going to machine this out. So I actually do not want my adaptive path for this channel to touch these. So that's why we've created this sketch, and what we're going to do in that one is actually select the sketch as part of the geometry. So I just edited this because I do want to show you how that's defined. My tool's been selected already, and when I go into the geometry tab, I've chosen to select my boundary by selection, and I have actually manually selected that sketch. So it's a really great tool to define a custom area that you're going to be machining. In addition to that, you can control the tool containment area, and here I've set it to the tool outside boundary. So it's going to allow it to go outside the boundary, just an additional offset of 0.25, and that just actually helps me a little bit remove some of the material. So I can just show you briefly what that's going to do. It's just generating here. And here you can see when I select it, you can see how it's cleaned out a little bit on this outside, but the main focus is just basically that is where the tool is coming out, extending, and then leading into the next cut. It's not going to actually remove the full area. So it was a bit of a time saver doing that. I'm not going to be focused on that in terms of the adaptive. I'll be focusing on that when I actually get into the bottom and the right sides of those. You can see here that when I get into the, actually I'll show on this one, there's the adaptive clearing for the majority of that side. Okay, so that was the main thing I wanted to show you in there. Again, that's a roughing pass. When I get into the finishing for that channel on the top, I've used a horizontal, so it's removing that flat surface you can see in here. And then as well, I've added a contour and scallop to define in here. So I've actually set some areas here. So if I go in here, you can see that in the geometry area, there's an option here for me to define my slope. And with that slope, I'm actually controlling when it will actually use this tool path to cut the material. So from a 0 to 25-degree slope, that's when it'll grab and actually use the scallop tool. So if I cancel this out, you can see that in this gray area, it's not adding tool path. That's a steeper cut, but it is using this finishing path down here and as well at the top. So that's within those angular ranges. And the contour was what was used to do that other outside of those angular ranges. So those were refined a little bit after I actually played my tool path and looked at it, and I realized, doing the whole thing with a contour, then finishing with a scallop was just going to add too much cutting time. So setting those angles was a really valuable tool to minimize the cutting time. We also have a bunch of drilling paths in here on some of the different sides, all of which I've showed you already before.